Okay, so your Chimo greetings, Yedase. We thank everybody for tuning in to this special live stream on KUKUU-TUNTUM The Ancestral Jurisdiction. For those who are unaware, I am Ojirafo Kwesi Ranehmbata Akan, Ojirafo of Akwamu Mine, Amaruka Etifi Mu, the Akwamu Nation in North America within Ojira Mine, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people in the Western Hemisphere. So we posted this in a couple of different places on social media and so forth, and we wanted to touch on this. Happens to be the 21st anniversary of our seminal work, KUKUU-TUNTUM The Ancestral Jurisdiction. So we put this out actually August 25th, 13,002, so-called 2002. And since that time, it's 21 years old, full grown and so forth, a generation that the text has been out. We first put it out as a 3 CD set. It was an audio book, a 3 CD set. Of course, eventually that became MP3s, posted online and so forth in the form of the audio book, but then we published the full transcript as a softcover book, which we still have available. But then we also have, the ebook version. So just this book, along with our other 30 books, we've published 31 books to date. So far, we have some more books coming out, but I have published 31 books so far on various aspects of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African ancestral religion, culture, nation building, restoration, and so forth, various topics, linguistics, and different things. But as with all of our 31 books, the ebook version of KUKUU-TUNTUM The Ancestral Jurisdiction is a free download. So all 31 of our books, free downloads from our website. But what we want to do is we want to talk about the significance of the text, because it's groundbreaking in a number of different ways. And we're also going to talk about what we've done over the past, since we released it in this past generation. There are over 1 million downloads of the book and so forth. The ebook version of the book, as well as the, audio files, the MP3 files for people to listen, so you can hear the names of the divinities and the entire cosmology. You can hear the language and so forth. So that's why initially we released it as a audiobook, so people can hear exactly, Al-Sar and Al-Set and Heru and Ra and Ra'ed and Amen and Amenet and so forth. But people have been raised on this. Just like if you think about the way we've been conditioned, corrupted mentally, you see the whites and offspring put out insane kinds of content. Back in the day, they were putting out things like, Jerry Springer and Jenny Jones and Ricky Lake and all this nonsense. So when our children would come home after school and parents were away, these are the kinds of foolish things that they would be inundated with mentally. Of course, the whites and offspring had a hostile takeover of conscious hip hop as well as R&B and any form of music, and flooded the airwaves with idiotic, self-destructive, criminal type and degenerate type of rap, whether it was coming from men or women promoting sex and strippers and everything else, men promoting murder and misogyny and all these different kinds of things. They suppressed the conscious, intelligent, progressive Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or Afrocentric forms of expression. They suppressed that, forced people underground, so they had to produce their own things and put out their own things and distribute their own work and so forth, which is fine because we need to do these things on our own anyway. But all over the airwaves, all over the world, they will promote the most degenerate expression of pseudo-ill culture. So while they were doing that and raising a generation of brainwashed, self-destructive, self-hating individuals and really curating that corrupt mindset in our people, we were putting forward this information that transformed the lives, transformed the mindset, transformed the culture, the way of life of the people, adults as well as children. People learning about Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth, learning that these fake religions and their fictional cartoon characters never existed, including Jesus and of course, Jesus, Yeshua, Allah, Yahweh, Buddha, Brahmin, Muhammed, Allah, all these fictional cartoon characters, when we eradicated that and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that they never existed of any form or of any race, then of course people began to transform their lives. People learned about their identity as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people, transformed their lives, transformed their diets, changed their names, and reclaimed their ancestral names, reclaimed their ancestral religious practices. Some people began to open up businesses, establish independent Black schools, and so forth. All transformation from the inside out, from the outside in, from the bottom up, and so forth. So people having children, people becoming married, people valuing marriage, relationships, balanced relationships of the Afurakani man and Afuraitkaitnit woman of the proper age range and so forth, naming their children based on ancestral religious practices, raising their children up in ancestral religion in an authentic expression. So by the time we get to 21 years, you have some people who were born into the culture. Their parents were teaching them. They will play the KUKUU-TUNTUM while they're in the car, while the baby is in the car seat and so forth. They will play the KUKUU-TUNTUM. And I did that with my own son and so forth, while the children are falling asleep so it can get deeply embedded within their sum, with their spirit and so forth. So now you have adults who are young adults who are in college and some who have graduated college and become, husbands and wives and so forth. They were raised on KUKUU-TUNTUM The Ancestral Jurisdiction. So once again, you can download it for free. You can read the book. You can listen to the audio. We would suggest you listen to the audio as well as read the book. But we're going to go into some detail about the impact and the ramifications of the accurate information that we find here and what's different about what we put forward. Why it's a seminal work, why it is different than what other people put forward, why it is groundbreaking. Why when people listen to the KUKUU-TUNTUM, they always say, this is the most impactful work that they have experienced. So let's go to our page quickly, and I will put this that's the link directly to the page on the website. Okay, so this is the front cover, of course, and you will see an image of Asara set in Heru. And right on the front cover, we go into talking, showing the topics that are addressed. And this usually would catch people's attention: origin of creation, origin of the name Afuraitkaitnit, Africa, origin and nature of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit Africans, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral culture, origin and nature of the whites and their offspring, rooted in the insanity of dissexuality, homosexuality, and incest. That is the nature of the whites and their offspring, non-Black individuals. And when we put this out 21 years ago, of course, it was true then, just like it is now. But now people can really see exactly what we were talking about. They're the ones who are promoting this idiocy of transgenderism. Of course, they've always promoted dissexuality, homosexuality, and so forth. But they're really showing in detail their ill nature, the nature of the whites and their offspring, meaning non-Black individuals, whether it's white Europeans, white Americans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white Asians, white pseudo-Native Americans. No matter what you're talking about, non-Black individuals, they are spirits of disorder. That's how they incarnate. And we talk about that in the text. And they are rooted in sexual deviance. That is their nature. So of course they're going to promote that. That's who they are. But that's not who we are. We don't care about what they're doing because that's the enemy. We can care about what our people are doing. So the cosmological structure of creation, nature and function of the Nananon, Nsamanfo, and Abosom, Egungun, and Orisha, Kuvito, and Vodou. That means the ancestresses and ancestors, the goddesses and gods. And of course, we talk about the balance of male and female, so we don't say the creator, the gods, and the ancestors. We say the great mother and great father, supreme being, the creator and creatress, the goddesses and the gods, the ancestresses and ancestors. So talking about that and, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religion, the origin of our Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit African ancestral clans, and so forth. Now, and then the second portion, the lion's share of the portion, origin of the fictional characters and false religions and writings: Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Moses, Aaron, David, Judah, Jesus, Mary, Yeshua ben Pandera, Muhammad, Allah, Yahweh, Elohim, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Brahmin, Christianity and the Bible, Islam and the Quran, Judaism, Hebrewism and the Torah, Hinduism and the Vedas, Buddhism and the Dhammapadas, European pseudo-esotericism, and the Kabbalah. So these are the things that we touch on in a narrative fashion. And let's look at what we start off talking about. And then, since we put forward the KUKUU-TUNTUM in 13,002, of course, since that time, first we put out the Uben Sheng, that was our very first book. The second book was the KUKUU-TUNTUM, The Ancestral Jurisdiction. And as we said before, in total, we have 31 books. So there were 29 books that came after that. So the books that we published since we released the KUKUU-TUNTUM, many of them go into detail cosmologically and linguistically into the information that we first released in the KUKUU-TUNTUM. So let's look at the groundbreaking aspects of it. Excuse me. So this is Heru, Alsar, and Alset. So that's just the introduction. And one thing that we note, the information found in the text, the cosmology and the culture and everything that we talk about, the references, we had 13 tracks. Originally it was 3 CDs, 5 tracks on the first CD, 3 tracks on the second CD, and 5 tracks on the third, but it's 13 tracks, 13 MP3 files. And we had the track number, as you can see. And then we have, the specific references, ancient texts from Kamit, and then the track numbers associated with the reference text. So we do that, for example, the Pert Im Heru, Book of Coming Forth by Day, misnomered Book of the Dead. But the Pert Im Heru, or Runu Pert Im Heru, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, and so forth, the specific version of that, and this first reference is the Papyrus of Ani. The person who transitions name was Ani or Anui. In tracks 2, 6, 7, and 8, when you look at the cosmology explained in tracks 2, 6, 7, and 8, is derived from partially that particular papyrus of Ani. Another papyrus of Hunefer, 2, 6, 7, and 8, that's the reference as well. The hymn to Amen in the so-called Leiden papyrus, when you look at tracks 2, 4, and 5, that's the reference text, one of the reference texts, the Nesimen papyrus, the hymn to Hapi, the Sheft or papyrus of Teret, which is so-called Lamentations of Alset and Nebuchadnezzar, the Shabaka text, the text of Teta and Pepi, so-called pyramid text, the tomb of Seti I, the Shat Imduat, the 12 hours of the night, the tomb of Seti I, the destruction of mankind, the book of the Cow of Heaven that we're going to get into, the tomb of Seti, the 75 praises of Ra, the so-called litany of Ra, the hymn to Alsar, Stele of Amin Mes, tomb of Nefertari, Per Kainsu Im Waset Neferhetep, temple of Kainsu. So when you look through these different temples, tombs, texts, Meru or pyramid texts, and so forth, the cosmology explained in the KUKUU-TUNTUM comes directly from the source primary text. So this is not something, of course, that we make up and we reference the text, because you can download all of these texts all over the internet. And of course, we have our 2-part course, 6 weeks for part 1, 6 weeks for part 2, called Medut Ntoro, the reading and writing of the Medutu, the so-called hieroglyphs, so you can learn to read and write the hieroglyphs and what we have with regard to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people. We have an extra the approach that we utilize with regard to, examining these texts. We have added information because the living languages of Afuraitkaitnit are directly descended from our ancestral language of Kamit. So you will find that the terms and so forth, for example, in the Akan language, are the exact same terms you find in ancient Kamit. So we didn't rely and don't have to rely on Europeans translating the text. We can use the languages of Afuraitkaitnit Africa today to prove that. In fact, let's look at one particular reference for that we published an article. Just so you can see that. Okay, so let me go out of this and come back in. We've published 31 books, but we also have a number of articles that we've published. This is one of them. Okay. So we have over 100 articles we've published in addition to the 31 books. This one is called Akan Vocalizations of Our Ancestral Language of Kamit, showing that the Akan people, primarily who live in Ghana and Ivory Coast, there are over 26 million Akan people living between Ghana and Ivory Coast today, one of the largest ethnic groups on the continent of Afuraitkaitnit, one of the largest groups from whom our people were taken and forced into North America. So groups like the Akan, Yoruba, Ewe, Igbo, Bakongo, Ovambo, Mende, Gola, Kisi, and so forth. There are certain groups that are the largest groups from whom most of our people were taken. And this is why when people are forced into the Western Hemisphere and they start learning about ancestral religions, some people are naturally drawn to the Yoruba tradition, the Yoruba language, because that's who they are. Some people are naturally drawn to the Ewe religious practice, which is Vodou, and Ewe language, because that's who they are. Some of us are drawn to Akan ancestral religion and Akan language because that's who we are. And this is why you see that we talk about Akan ancestral religion and so forth and Akan language, because we happen to be an Akan organization. But when we published this article to show the cultural continuity and cosmological continuity of culture from ancient Kanini Kamit to West Afuraitkaitnit in the Akan language and culture, which carries over into the Hoodoo tradition in North America today. So very quickly, we showed a few terms just to prove a point. In ancient Kamit, very often they will place the E. Egyptologists back a number of decades ago will place an E in between two consonants if they didn't know what the vocalization of it would be. So that was an arbitrary placement until they could figure out what the vowel would be. So when you look, for example, at the bowl here with the lip, that's the K sound, the K, and then the bolt, the horizontal bolt, is the S sound, so that's KS, and then repeat it, KS again. They didn't know what the vowel placement should be. They didn't know if it should be an A or an E or I or U and so forth. So they would arbitrarily place an E in between consonants as a placeholder until they could figure out what the placement would be, what the vowel, the value would be. So you see kes to chatter foolishly, to jest. In the Coptic dialect, Copt, right here is kes. But when you look in the Akan language, kasa in the Akan dictionary, Akan people speaking the language today, of course, to talk much, talk noisily, to chatter. So to chatter foolishly, to jest, kes in H. Kamit, that's kasa in Akan. We still use the same word, same meaning. Another example, the term hem, to roar, to bellow. Hemet, cry, roar, bellow, battle cry. There's also a crown in ancient Kamit called the hem crown, which means that the battle crown, the war cry crown. But hem, to roar, to bellow. As you can see in Akan, the proper vocalization is hama, boisterous. The sea rages as when or if agitated by a storm, raging. So when it's talking about being boisterous, loud, raging, and they gave the example of the sea being raging and being loud and so forth, that's hem, to roar, to bellow, to make a battle cry. That's the loud sound. Same term in our ancient language continues today in Akan. You see the term kai in our ancient Kamit, to think out, to devise, speak, repeat, to say, to cry out, call out, tell out. Ka, and when you see the significator on over the A, it's ka. It means to emit a sound, to utter, speak, say, tell. Kai, and it's also pronounced, this is the K sound, the bowl with the lip once again. The little bird is the ah sound, and the two strokes are the E. So ka, kai, that's one spelling of the term. But there's another spelling here with just the bowl and the lip, the K sound, and the bird here, the ah sound, and just ka. So there are two variations, kai and ka. In the Akan language, we maintain the ka, to emit a sound, to utter, speak, say, tell, to think out, to speak, to repeat, to say, cry out, call out, tell out. Same word, same vocalization. And we do the same thing with sha or shai, that's she, to fix, to appoint, to determine, to ordain, to predestinate. The hy in Akan is the she sound, so that's she, to fix, to set up, institute, to celebrate a festival, to set, constitute, appoint, to predestine, predestinate, appoint, or ordain beforehand. These are very specific cosmological terms. It's not just like saying, well, ma means, or mama means mother, and baba means father, and so forth. And we found it in the language. Of course, we find things like that. But when you have specific cosmological terms, to predestinate, to ordain beforehand, she in ancient Kamit, and she in Akan. Now we're talking about very specific cosmologically complex terms. And just a couple more, we have Ari, which means the eye. We also have An, which is also An or Ani, to turn a glance at something, the symbol of the eye here. Ani or Eni, the eyes. In Akan, also a look. So as you can see, we have thousands of words in Akan that they are exact same words from ancient Kamit. We can look in our own language, find the actual terms, their actual vocalizations, the names of deities, what their functions in creation are, that Akan people are still worshiping, being possessed by, and so forth. And they're the exact same deities that you find in ancient Kamit, with the same colors, operating through the same features in nature, and so forth, in creation and all of that. So that's just one of the various ways that we prove what we're saying. We're not relying on the whites and offspring, we're relying on our own ancestral language, and it proves it in detail. Now, okay, so let's switch back to the KUKUU-TUNTUM. Okay, so there's two separate things. Number one, we use our ancient texts as a reference for the cosmology that we're talking about in the book. We're not relying on Europeans who are interpreting texts and talking about, well, maybe it means this, or maybe this deity has this kind of relationship. We're going to the actual text that our people wrote thousands of years ago, and that is the source information for the book. Now, and then of course we have our own language and culture that's still living, that's proof. So the first thing we say is following the footsteps of your elder ancestresses and ancestors. To follow the balanced path of those who have walked ahead of you is to embrace your true stream and balance your life. Realize that you do not exist alone. Your independence is only a measure of your proper functioning within the web of interdependence in creation. Your place in the world only reveals the larger function of your ancestral clan. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, remember your true story, and you will remember the divine function given to you in your beginning by that great ancestral spirit and the means by which you must execute that function in life through your ancestral culture. If you forget and you return and embrace the past to understand, it is not taboo. So that first line is following the footsteps of your elder ancestresses and ancestors. That is a proverb from ancient Deities of Kamit. And the final line, if you forget and return and embrace the past to understand, it is not taboo. That is the proverb associated in the Akan tradition with the Sankofa Adinkra symbol. Sewo Werifi Nawo Sankofa Yin Chi. That is the proverb that we put forward there. Now let's go down. And that sets the tone. And the first thing we talk about is the origin of the term Africa. So we start off saying Ra is the name of the God who is the creator of the world. Ra'et is the name of the goddess who is the creatress of the world. Ra and Ra'et are two halves of a whole, two sides of one coin. That whole, that coin is the great spirit of the supreme being. Ra and Ra'et together are the great spirit who brought things, who brought into being all of creation. They're the divine living energy moving through all that exists, all created entities and so forth. Now let's show that once we put forward who Ra and Ra'ed are, eventually we published an entire book on Ra and Ra'ed a number of years ago. They are called in Yonkumpon and in Yonkunton in the Akan tradition, Ra and Ra'ed in ancient Kanit and Kemet. This is Ra, of course, in the form with the head of the falcon. Sometimes he's shown with the head of the male, sometimes the head of the falcon and so forth. And then this is Ra'et, the creatress. So we start off talking about the balance of male and female, the creator and creatress. You have many individuals who talk about Ra as the sun god and so forth, which of course he is not. Aten is the sun divinity. Atenet is the female sun goddess. Aten is the sun god. And Ra and Ra'ed are the creator and creatress who created the sun and all of the stars and everything else. But they will possess the sun, spirit possession, and utilize the sun and other stars as spiritual transmitters, physical transmitters of their spiritual energy. So they will possess the sun and use that orb to transmit their divine living energy. But Ra and Ra'ed are not the sun god or sun goddess. They are the creator and creatress, and they operate in balance. They are the great spirit of the supreme being. And of course, when we talk about operating through all things, all created entities, plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani meaning African, Black, human life only. Now, so we show who they are in the Akan tradition. We show who they are in their representations. And we talk about the cosmology, of course, but we show why they're associated with the rainbow, the circular rainbow surrounding the sun as well as surrounding the moon is the origin of the hieroglyphic symbol of the Medut representing Ra and Ra'ed, as you can see here. The rainbow serpent encircling the sun, as well as the arched serpent, the rainbow, and so forth. This is the origin of Ra and Ra'ed, the rainbow serpent, creator and creatress. Creator and creatress of the universe, represents the collective ancestry of all Afuraitkaitnit people. And when you see that symbolism in ancient Kemet, that's the origin of the symbol. In Akan, in Yonkumpon, and in Yonkunton as the creator and creatress. Yonkunton also means the rainbow and so forth. And then we look in the Vodou tradition. Da and Idahuedo. Da is Ra. Da, Ra is the same name. Idahuedo, that is Ra and Ra'ed, the two rainbow serpents who swallow their tail, the circular rainbow serpents with the creator and creatress in the Vodun tradition and represents the collective ancestry of all Afuraitkaitnit people. And the same is true in the Yoruba tradition, Odumare and Oshumare. You see Oshumare with this circular serpent, rainbow serpent, swallowing the tail and so forth. Same representation. The rainbow serpent is the creator and creatress, operating through the sun, represents the collective ancestry of all Afurakani people. So we show it in ancient Deities of Kamit, in the Akan tradition, Vodun tradition, Yoruba tradition, and so forth. What's key is the fact that we engage in ritual practice, we communicate with these divinities, and they show us who they are. So they're not going to allow us to talk about Ra. Ra is not going to allow us to talk about Ra, not talk about her. She's not going to allow us to simply invoke Ra and not invoke her energy, because her energy is no different than you have a mother and a father. You have a sperm cell and an ovum, and both of them you fuse together to make up your physical body. You receive genetic material from your father that impacts you, genetic material from your mother that impacts you. You couldn't dismiss either one. That would take away from your identity. You can't dismiss the energy of Ra'et. That's one half of the divine living energy of all of creation. You can't dismiss, just like you can't dismiss the energy of Ra. So we talk about these divinities because we invoke them ritually, commune with them, align with them, communicate with them, and so forth, adults as well as children, so we know exactly who they are. Now, you have people go back and forth to Kamit and do trips to Kamit and so forth. And of course, we do ours, but they will go right, as we said before, the previous broadcast, right to a pillar, and you'll see an image of Ra, and they'll take pictures and say, this is Ra. Very often they'll say, this is Ra, the sun god, and so forth. But when they see a pillar that has Ra'et, they'll just keep walking because they don't even know she exists. They've been listening simply to European Egyptologists, and they'll talk about Ra, they'll talk about Amen, but they won't talk about Ra'et and Amenet. But we start off the KUKUU-TUNTUM 21 years ago saying Ra is the god who's the creator of the world. Ra'et is the goddess who's the creatress of the world. Now, then we talk about Ka, is the male name of the black substance of space, the divinity operating through the black substance of space. Ka'et is the female divinity operating within the black substance of space, which is now called dark energy and dark matter by physicists. Excuse me. And then you have Amen, is the great God, the father of all, and Amenet is the great goddess, the mother of all. Now, once again, let's switch over back to our book so you can see an image of these divinities. So in the book, in Yonkumpon and in Yonkunton, Ra and Ra'et, in the beginning of the text, when we're talking about some of the basic cosmology, as you can see here, this is an image of Amenet on the left and Amen on the right. Sometimes Amenet is called Amenet Ra'et. He is sometimes called Amen Ra, but that's simply a title because Amen and Ra are two different divinities. And just to prove that real quick, scroll up a little bit. This is another image of Amen seated. This is Ra, this is Ptah, this is Atem. These are different deities. And to go a little bit further, in the temple of Abu, symbol of Ra-Mesu, Ra, misnomer Ramses, but Ra-Mesu II, in so-called Abu Simbel in Kanit in Nubia, you'll see the image of Amen sitting here. You will see Ra sitting here. You see the king sitting in between the divinities. This is Amen, this great supreme being on the masculine side. This is Ra, and this is Ptah. These are three different divinities, and the king, the Ain Su, the Per-A, so-called pharaoh, is sitting in between the divinities, taking his place and so forth. Now, but let's go back to show. So that's Amen and Amenet. The great mother is Amenet, the great father is Amen. Together, they constitute the supreme being. And as we always say, if you look at your body as an Afurakani man, as an emanation in a microcosmic expression of Amen, and the Afuraitkaitnit woman, the African Black woman, as an emanation of Amenet in a microcosmic expression. Then you're the great being. You give birth to smaller beings within your great being, which are your organs that regulate order within your body and so forth. Those organs are the deities, Yabosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, the Ntoru, misnomer, Neteru, Netutu, and so forth. And those organs give birth to smaller beings, which are the cells, liver cells, heart cells, spleen cells, and so forth. And the cells are the children of the organ. When they serve their parent organ or parent deity, those cells are serving you, the great being, at the same time. So a liver cell is serving their parent deity, the liver, and operating within liver functions. Then they're serving you, the great supreme being, at the same time. We are the cells, plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Black human life only. We are the cells within the great divine body of the supreme being. The organs are the deities, the goddesses and gods, the spirits who animate the suns, moons, planets, black substance of space, oceans, rivers, atmosphere, fire, inner core of Earth and other planets and so forth. The spiritual forces that animate these features of creation, those are the deities. And then we are the cells. And we live in harmony with them. And when we transition, and we, just like cells transition and they go into the water system in the body, the 70+% of the body, they get nourished and rejuvenated and reconstituted and reborn as new cells. That water system within the great divine body is the ancestral realm, the realm of the ancestresses and ancestors. They nourish us, rejuvenate us, cleanse us, transmit energy to us, just like the water system in the body does for the cells, the go-between between the deities, the organs and systems, and the cells themselves. That is the ancestral community. So we are in a microcosm, the universe itself. And of course, every now and then you have some cells that become cancerous, they become disfigured, and they try to consume and destroy the other cells, but the immune system isolates them, kills them, and expels them from the body. The whites and their offspring are the cancerous cells within the body of Black humanity, within the body of creation. They have a temporal existence. They came into existence like cancerous cells do. They sought to consume and destroy everything in their path once they came out of northern Eurasia and went all around the world. And now they are being eradicated through nature as well as through warfare, and will be completely eradicated through chemical and biological warfare. So now, let's switch back over. So we have Amen and Amenet. Once again, that was groundbreaking for our people, because very often people talk about Amen, Amen Ra, and so forth. They will totally dismiss the mother of creation. You can't talk about divine order and talk about the masculine and not talk about the actual feminine divinity that we are totally dependent upon for our sustenance. So we started talking about this 21 years ago. So let's switch back over. So we're talking about Amen and Amenet, the great mother and father of all. We talked about Ra and Ra'at being the great spirit, divine living energy, animating all things, that divine fire energy moving throughout the great being, just like you have solar energy, fire, divine living life force energy moving throughout your being. That is your Ra force if you're a male, your Ra'at force if you're a female. You're like Amen if you're a male and you have a Ra force that moves through your system. You're Amenet, like Amenet if you're a woman, and you have that Ra'at force moving through, life force energy moving throughout your system. Now, so we talk about that portion, and then we talk about the creation of the world and so forth. We don't have to go into that particular portion, but when we talk about the fashioning of the world, the divine living energy moving throughout the black substance of space, spiraling through the black substance of space, carving out black spheres, the energy of Ra and Ra'at penetrating those black spheres and illuminating them, those becoming the first stars and so forth, and the stars having, projectiles emitted from their bodies that become the planets and so forth, the divine living energy of Ra and Ra'at moving through those planetary spheres and enlivening them and bringing vitality and life force energy to those spheres, including our sphere, which is Earth. Then we talk about how Earth was totally covered with water. Let's switch over to that portion. Earth being totally covered with water and volcanic eruptions on the ocean floor once the energy of Ronrad moves to the core of Earth and so forth, causing energy to manifest, volcanic eruptions, causing a portion of the Earth's floor to surge upward, to break through the surface of the water. That became the first landmass of Earth, and that is called Ka or Ka'et. And let's look at that in a different text. Since we released the KUKUU-TUNTUM, of course, and we talked about that, we wrote an entire book on that aspect of it. And that book is Afuraitkaitnit, The Origin of the Term Africa. And let's just go down to the end. On the front cover, we show Afurakani in the Medutu and so forth. But as you can see in the Medutu, Ka and Kayat means a highland, high ground, high place, the land above the surface of the Nile, a high place on which the God of creation stood and so forth. In the Coptic dialect, you see it's Kai and so forth, Kai. And let's just also show this imagery. So we're talking about when the primordial Earth was formed. If you look at the formation of an island on YouTube and you see volcanic eruptions and then smoke coming from under the water, and then a portion of the land bursts through the surface of the water, and that's the first hill that's, manifest, a landmass. This is what we're talking about. That's the first landmass of Earth. It's called Ka on the masculine side, Ka'et, the feminine side, which means a high land, Ka and Ka'et. And with the energy of Ra and Ra'ed move within the landmass, they have a different title. When Ra moves inside of matter, matter is called Afu in the language of ancient Kamit. Afu means flesh, but it also means house or place of residence. So Afu Ra is the title of Ra when he's moving through matter. When divine solar fire energy is moving inside matter, inside of Afu, Ra is therefore called Afu Ra, meaning Ra moving within the flesh, the Afu, moving inside matter, Afu, Afu Ra. And the same with Ra'et, she is Afu Ra'et, or Afra'et, or Afrait, and later Afri and so forth. So when Afura moved through the primordial Ka, it became the Ka of Afura, Afuraka, the land of Afura, the land of the creator, Afura Ka. When the Ra'et moves through the primordial Ka'et, the primordial landmass, it is the Ka'et of Afu Ra'et, Afuraitkaitnit, the land of the creatress, Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit, the land of the creator, the land of the creatress, and so forth. So we show that entire cosmology. We also show in Paraka, so-called Philae, in southern Kemet, Ahraka is the dialectical variant. It's either Afraka, Ahraka, and then you have Ahrakat or Ahraikayat. So we have both versions, the Ahraka, Ahraikayat, or Afraka, Afuraikayat. But when we go to Philae, ancient Nubia and so forth, and the temple of Philae in Kemet, you see these, these Medut, these hieroglyphs. And in fact, let's just show a video of that real quick. Now, this is our page, our Arikat page. And we are going back to Kemet in September. Well, next month, but also September for those who can't come in the spring. We have September 26th through October 4th. And then, of course, we have our yearly trip in the spring. So we have the following trip is next June. So if you would like to travel to Kemet and Kanit, Egypt and Nubia with us in September 26th through October 4th, over 5 months from now, you can do so. Or if you want to go next spring, June 4th or June 12th, we have both of those flyers on the website. And we also have a 50% discount. And we sent the email out earlier Thursday and Friday, saying this may be the last weekend for the 50% discount because some people have already captured those discounted spaces, but we do have a couple of them left. But on this page, we're talking about that ancient temple of Philae, Paraka, and so forth. Show a video of our recent trip to Kemet. Okay, so we were in Aswan, border between Kemet and Nubia. These are the Nubitu, the Nubians. These are the descendants of the original people of Kemet. Of course, the Arabs are in control right now, but the descendants of the original people who stayed, some of us migrated away and went to West Africa, but some stayed. They still live in Nubia. These are the Nubitu. They run the ferry boats and so forth and transport you back and forth from the mainland to the island. And here we are on the boat going to the Temple of Al Set on the island. And that Afuraitkaitnit, and so forth, Afuraitkaitnit are on the pillars in this particular some of the Nubitu youth swim up, paddle up to the boat. They sell certain things and so forth. Switch over real quick. This is one of the Nubian villages that we visited, that we visit every time we go to Kemet. They keep crocodiles in their living room and they raise them as babies, crocodiles up into a certain age, and then they release them in the water when they get too big, when they have the crocodiles in the living room and so forth. That's cosmological as well. That's an ancient animal totem. Deities Sobek and Akan, that's Odinchim, and Odun, that's Ajakpa and so forth. But that is a sacred animal totem in ancient Kemet. It's a sacred animal totem for certain deities in the Akan tradition. You see the heads of the crocodiles here. We'll just get closer a little bit. Those are the crocodiles at home. And what you'll see is, so that's right in their living room. There's a relationship, just like we have relationships with other animals and so forth. We have relationships with the animal totems associated with certain deities. See Nubitu youth standing on top of crocodiles. And when you look at the ancient divinity, the child standing on top of the crocodile, that was not symbolic of standing over your lower nature, your animal nature. You're literally riding the crocodile. Yes, we communicate with those spirits, but it's a literal thing as well as a figurative and symbolic thing as well. But you would only know that if you were involved in it. But that Afuraitkaitnit, dialectical variant of Afuraitkaitnit can be found in that temple, in that ancient temple and so forth. Now, switch out. Okay. So once again, we have different images of Amen and Amenet. That's Amen and Amenet. But just to show you quickly, when Ra's in the form of the falcon, he is called Ra. When he's sailing the boat of the sun, the Aten, during the day. But when he goes into the underworld, when the spiritual force, divine living energy goes in the underworld at sunset, then moves through matter, he goes from that form of the falcon-headed divinity, an avian animal, to a flat-horned ram, land animal, moving through the underworld, and he's called Afu-Ra. And this is where you get Afura, the title of Afura, Ra moving through matter. When Ra first moved the primordial hill, the first landmass of Earth, he was Afura moving through the Ka. This is where you get Afuraka from. And when Ra'et was moving through the first landmass, it's Afuraet. This is where you get Afuraitkaitnit from. And of course, later in the book, and once again, you see Af, flesh, meat, or joint, Off, flesh, meat, carcass, but then you also have Ah, means flesh as well. Afait, tent, camp, or chamber. Then Ah, meaning island, landmass, Ah, meaning home. So we were just showing that Af means flesh, but Af means enclosure. Ah means flesh, but Ah means enclosure, a dialectical variant. Two different ways to say Ahraka, Afuraitkaitnit, or Afraka, Afuraitkaitnit, same thing. And the other piece is that amongst the Berbers, which most people are unaware of, they call Ra'et as Afraet. They call her Afri or Ifri, as you can see here. By the time the Romans invaded, they were printing coins, and they have Dea Africa, meaning the goddess Africa, and she's laying or reposing on her bench. She has the elephant headdress and so forth. They call her Dea Africa, the goddess Africa, and so forth. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Roman author Pliny the Elder stated that nobody in Africa began any undertaking without first consulting the goddess Africa. That's Dea Africa. She's called Afri or Ifri amongst the Berbers, the blacks of ancient North Afurakai. Let's look at an image of the Berbers. These are other images of Ra'et. We already saw this one from the Temple of Kamit. A couple of other images of Ra'et. These are Fula women, Fulani, but Fula women. You have Fula Berbers. You also have, this is another black Berber, North Afurakai. I've been living in North Afurakai for the past 10,000 plus years. But then you also have the Tuareg Berbers and so forth, living in North Afurakai, as well as moved into Mali and places like that. But the Berber nation, the region where the Berbers live, is now called Libya. Back then, it was the ancient empire of the Berbers and so forth, the Bribri people and so forth. And there was a Berber or Bribri, a Libyan king of Kamit, Uput II and so forth. That's him. Came from west of Kamit in Libya, what is now Libya, went towards the Nile Valley and so forth, was ruling for a while in the 23rd dynasty, just showing that this was a Berber king, a Bribri king and so forth. But these Tuareg women, these Tuareg Berbers, these are the original black Berbers, not the white invaders that you see in North Africa now, even though black people are still there. Just like in Kemet now, you see the Arabs, white Arabs in control, but in southern Kemet and different other parts of Kemet, you will see the black Nubitu, the original black population. So, but it's these people who called Afraet, or Afuraet, they would say Afraet or Afraid or Afri or Ifri. and so forth, different dialectical variants of that. But that's who they are invoking. And of course, the Romans saw that and called her Dea Africa, the goddess Africa, the goddess Afri, and so forth. But this is what we go into in the first portion of KUKUU-TUNTUM The Ancestral Jurisdiction. We also show that Ra and Ra'ed are the great spirit, the divine living energy animating all things. Ka and Kayat means landmass, but cosmologically, Ka and Kayat are the masculine and feminine terms for soul. Your soul, your divine consciousness is your Ka. If you're male, Ka'et if you're female. Black males and females only. So Ra is the divine living spirit. Ra'ed is the divine living spirit. And then Ka is soul, Ka'et is soul. So Afu means flesh. Ra and Ra'ed are the great spirit. And Ka and Ka'et are soul. So Afu, Ra, Ka, flesh, spirit, soul. Afu, Ra'ed, Ka'et, flesh, spirit, soul on the feminine side. So we give a proper definition of the origin of the term Africa. And in our book, Afuraitkaitnit, the origin of the term Africa, we prove in detail that Africa didn't come from the Romans. It didn't come from the Roman term. Apreka didn't come from the Greek term Afrik. It didn't come from Phoenician term Farika. It didn't come from Ifriqiya in Arabic. It did not come from Africus in Latin, talking about the wind divinity and so forth. It didn't come from Scipio Africanus. We prove that none of those things are true. And all of those names that you have in Greek, Latin, Phoenician, even in Sanskrit, Apara, as well as Scipio Africanus, we show that he took the name Africanus when he invaded Africa, but his last name was Scipio before he invaded North Africa. Just like his brother's last name was Scipio before he invaded Asia. And when his brother invaded Asia, he became known as Scipio Asiaticus. And when the other brother invaded Africa, Afuraitkaitnit, he became known as Scipio Africanus. But prior to invading Afuraitkaitnit in Asia, those two brothers' last name was Scipio. So you have fools running around talking about Africa was named after a Roman general, a white man. Pure stupidity. Even a child who's 7 years old can Google Scipio Africanus and Scipio Asiaticus, the two brothers, and learn that they took on the names Africanus and Asiaticus after they invaded Africa and Asia. So for so-called scholars to still be running around foolishly talking about Africa was named after a Roman general, that's pure stupidity, and they're pseudo scholars. You can't trust anything they have to say if they can't even, address that basic fundamental reality. But we show the language, we show the cosmology, we show the actual deities. You can go to the papyri and stela and temple texts and Meru texts, pyramid texts, and tomb texts and so forth to prove it conclusively. Now, so that's the first contribution of our actual identity. We are children of Ra and Ra'ed, the creator and creatress, Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit. Our bodies, our melanin dominant bodies come from the black mound, the Ka, the Kayat, and of course our souls are Ka and Kayat as well. Once people have that proper understanding, then they understand who they are as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people. And we've taught this in schools with children and so forth. They never forget that lesson. So we transform the proper notion of identity. Not just saying I'm African-centered or Afrocentric, but when you say I'm Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, you are identifying yourself as a child of Ra and Ra'ed. Your spirit comes from Ra and Ra'ed. Your soul comes from Ka and Kayat. Your flesh is permeated by the divine living energy of Ra and Ra'ed. We're directly related to the creator and creatress, and that gives us our proper identity and the structure of our spiritual anatomy in general. Now, so that's what we do in the first portion of the book. And then we show some of that cosmological information. And then we get into some cosmological aspects of the text. We say here, Afuraitkaitnit, people of Afuraitkaitnit recognize the spirit in plants, the soul in plants. We recognize plants as conscious living entities functioning in the world. We harmonize our spirits, our souls with theirs. As we interact with them, we tune into them. Our communication with them engenders respect for their function in the world and their relation to our function in the world. Our physical interaction with plant life reflects our respect for this spiritual relationship. It is through this respect that we maintain balance between ourselves and plant life as we live interdependently upon one another. Then we talk about how we recognize the spirit in animals, the soul in animals, and our relationship with animal life. We talk about how we recognize the spirit and soul in one another as Afuraitkaitnit people, as conscious living entities in the world, and how we have an interdependent relationship. We recognize the spirit, the soul of the Afurakani male, Afuraitkaitnit female, two halves of one conscious living whole entity functioning in the world. The knowledge of that complementary balance engenders respect for our roles in creation. And this is the nature of our spiritual relationship. And we maintain balance between one another because we live interdependently upon one another. We say the same with regard to the spirits, the souls of our ancestresses and ancestors, the spirits and the souls of goddesses and gods and so forth, how we interact with them, how we relate to them and so forth, reflects that respect for that balanced relationship. Then we get into respecting the spirit within ourselves, the soul within ourselves, and we wrote a whole book on the nature of the soul, the deity that governs the spiritual head, the Ka, the Ka'et. It's called Okra in Akan and Okrawa in Akan, Ori, Nu, and Yoruba, and so forth, and Selido and Vodun and Chi and Igbo, but the divinity that governs the head is the soul. And of course, you have the divine living energy animating you, which is the spirit. So we're talking about our spiritual anatomy, and we talk about that respect we have for that internal balance that we seek to maintain. And then we talk about recognizing the spirits of disorder, those who have incarnated as spirits of disorder, those who do not have a Ka, a Kayat, a soul, a divine consciousness. These, of course, are the whites and their offspring. They're spiritually discordant. There's no exception to that reality. It's not like, well, some of them are okay. That's like saying some of the cancerous cells, the disfigured cells are okay, but some of them are not. Just by virtue of the fact that they are disfigured cancerous cells, they are out of harmony with every other cell in the body. The whites and their offspring of the disfigured, discordant, cancerous cells. That's how they incarnate. So that is the reality without any exception. The only solution is their complete eradication, extermination. Just like the only solution to cancerous cells is the removal, eradication of the cancerous cells from the body to preserve the integrity of this ordered body. So we talk about their origin. And of course, when we engage in ritual work spiritually, you can attune to their spiritual discordance. It's not just a belief. There's a difference between an individual who has a Ka, a divinity that governs the head, that all Afuraitkaitnit people have. And in every Afuraitkaitnit language, there's a term for the divinity that is installed in the spiritual head region. As we said, it's Ori, Inu in the Yoruba tradition, your personal Orisha. It's called the Okra for males and Okra for females in the Akan tradition, your personal Abosom. It's called the Selido in Vodun, your personal Vodu, the divinity that governs your head. It's called the Chi in Igbo, your personal Arusi, your personal deity that governs the head. Every ancestral language across the continent, wherever our people exist and wherever we migrated into the world or forced to migrate into the world, we know the divinity that governs our head. We communicate with that divinity. We have spiritual head cleansings to realign ourselves with that divinity. That's our anchor in divine order. That force is always directing our thoughts, intentions, and actions to help us align with divine order. The whites and their offspring don't have that divinity. They don't have a spiritual force rooted in divine order. They are spirits of disorder. This is why they don't have that. So there's nothing that can anchor them in divine order. They can't communicate with nor be possessed by the spirits of the deities, or spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors because they don't have any. So there's a clear distinction between us physically and also spiritually, and our people have always known this for thousands of years. Even in the text of Kemet, talking about the Asiatic, meaning the Eurasian, as well as the mentally ill, were not allowed in the temples. The unwashed, the mentally ill, and the Asiatic were not allowed inside of the temples because they would bring pollution or disorder into the temples. They were divinely prohibited, divinely tabooed from the temples. We've always known who these spirits of disorder are. So we talk about that, give a proper definition of who they are spiritually as well as physically. They're melanin recessive, but spiritually, they're also deficient as well. There's no exception to that reality. So that's what we talk about in that portion. And then we show the certain titles of Wa, to blaspheme, speak evil, and plot rebellion. Wai, the blasphemer, rebel, is a title of Apep. Wati, those who rebel against order, spirits of disorder. Kaitiu, the gods who slaughter the enemies of Ra and Asar, divine killers. Just like in Akan, you have the divine executioners, the Abrafo Aboson, the ones who kill the enemy under the direction of divine order and so forth. The Kaitiu in Kemet, the root of the term kite, which became kite to a ket to a het or hate in English, it comes from kayet in Kemet. And we have a whole book on the origin of the term hate, divine law, love, and divine hate, and so forth. And we show the etymology of the term and the cosmology of the term. But these are the deities who kill the enemies of Ra and Asar. The deities who engage in divine killing for the preservation of divine order. Just like your immune system kills cancerous cells for the preservation of your divine order. Lymphatic system as well. So we need to understand who we are. That's the previous piece. Our relationship to plant life, animal life, mineral life, Afurakani, human life, the planets, suns, moons, stars, oceans, rivers, the spirits that animate them, the divinities, our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, us as Afurakani men, Afuraitkaitnit women, our balance and so forth, our community, our relationship internally with ourselves, talking about all of creation, also internally, but then also who our enemy is. When you know who you are, then you also know who your enemy is, then you can make proper decisions. This is, once again, groundbreaking in the sense we give the cosmology of the origin of the white snare offspring, their nature as our absolute enemies, the cancerous cells within the great divine body. We know who we are, we know who our enemies are, just like the immune system cells and lymphatic system cells know who they are and know who the enemy are, and they are wired to eradicate the enemy for the preservation of the whole. If you don't know who your enemy is, or you're foolish enough to believe that you need to embrace your enemy or turn the other cheek and so forth, then you will always be under the boot of your enemy. You'll always be enslaved and controlled by your enemy. Our ancestral religious practices and culture and cosmology has the proper information. So you need to know who you are and who your enemy is, and your children need to know that just like you do, so you don't make mistakes. Just like children, the lion cubs and so forth, they learn very quickly that the hyenas are the enemy. Just because they drink at the same watering hole, the river and so forth, doesn't mean that the hyena won't come and try to rip the body apart of a lion cub or a lion or lioness and so forth. They know who they are, they know who the enemy is, and they make proper decisions. We know who we are, we know who our enemies are and have been for thousands of years, and they prove it to us every day. But we know internally, spiritually, whether they're a Eurasian baby in a bassinet or a cracker running a multinational corporation, that's still the same spirit of disorder, and there's no exception to that reality. No compromise. So we have proper definitions. And the next piece we talk about is incarnation of the spirit into the womb and so forth. So we get into some of that. And then the next section is when we start talking about law is the expression of order, divine law is the expression of divine order, the laws governing Afuraitkaitnit society are expressions of divine order. Afurakani man and Afuraitkaitnit woman and two halves of a whole. We are the balance of one another. This is law in Afuraitkaitnit society. Then we talk about amen and amenet, the balance of one another. Ra and ra'et, the balance of one another. Ka and ka'et, the balance of one another, and so forth. That balance permeates all of creation. Then we also go into detail about the divinity, female divinity of divine law and balance. The force of divine law and balance is ma'at on the feminine side, and the male deity of divine law and balance is ma'ah. So we were talking about ma'ah and ma'at, male and female deities of divine law and balance, 21 years ago. Many people talk about ma'at, but they've never heard of the deity ma'ah. Now let's pull up something very quickly. We did a 6-week course on Ma'al, the male deity of divine law and balance. And let's just show this real quick. Now, this is something that most people have never seen. When we were in the temple of Ramesu the Sixth in the Valley of the Kings and so forth. This is one video when we were talking about the male divinity. See male god Ma'al, tomb of Ramesu the Sixth. That is an image I took on my iPhone when I was in the temple of Ramesu the Sixth. I was looking for the male deity Ma'al. You can see his name is spelled with the sickle and the plinth here, and then the roll of papyrus, but that spells out Ma'al. He is the one half, the masculine half of the divine law that undergirds creation. Ma'at is the feminine half. We were talking about Ma'al and Ma'at 21 years ago. You invoke the divinity Ma'al to establish balance in your life, just like you invoke the divinity Ma'at. When we pour libation and invoke them, when we engage in ritual prayer and invoke them, we call their spirits to us, stimulate their shrines in our bodies to communicate with these divinities, to bring us mental balance, emotional balance, spiritual balance, physiological balance, and so forth. We invoke these divinities. They have different names in the various traditions across the continent, but they are Ma'an, Ma'at in ancient Deities of Kamit. You can't talk about Ma'at and then never talk about the male divinity Ma'al. That's just as imbalanced as talking about Amen and not talking about Amenet, or trying to invoke Ra and not invoke the female divinity Ra'et. So we were already talking about that and bringing that balance of male and female, complementary balance. There was never a time when there was just Amen and the female divinities were inferior. There was never a time when there were just the female divinities and the male divinities were inferior and so forth. There's always been a balance of male and female, starting with Amen and Amenet, Ra and Ra'et, Ka and Ka'et, and so forth. Okay, so that section, we start talking about Ma'an, Ma'at, divine law that undergirds all of creation. And then when you get to that section, then we start talking about these different divinities. When you look at Heru, for example, when you look at the cosmology, talking about Heru and Set, and they're battling one another, and Tuhuti, the divinity of divine wisdom, he's the judge between the two combatants and so forth. Heru has the title Shek in ancient Kemet, which means ruler. Set has the title Smai Ur. Smai means to join or unite, but it can also mean evil, associate, or fiend, and so forth. And then Tahuti has Eprehui. Ep means judge. Rehui means the two fighters or the two combatants. So Tahuti judge between the two combatants, Heru and Set. Heru operates through the cardiovascular system. Set operates through the nervous system and so forth. When your nervous system is overstimulated and then you silence what your heart is trying to direct you towards, things that are in harmony with divine order, and you just have a desire, that magnetism desire to, lust for certain things and so forth, and that overrides what's in your proper, in your heart, what's proper in your heart, that's Set trying to battle Heru. There's a battle between the cardiovascular system functioning, optimally, and the nervous system trying to utilize that desire to overcome what we should be doing. But then there's a judge between the two combatants. The divinity of wisdom adjudicates the matter, says Heru should be the leader. He should take, the seat of rulership that was held by his father Alsar, and Set should be put in his proper place. What's important about that entire story? So we have Eprehui, judge of the two men, Heru and Set, and so forth, a title of Tahuti. Here you have the Rehui, Heru, and Set. In this context, they're working together, but sometimes they're fighting and so forth. Shek, ruler, governor. You see the shepherd's crook and so forth. Director, prince, and so forth. Shek. And then, of course, Smai and Smai Ur, which means the great Smai, slayer, killer, and so forth. Why is that important? Because they took the titles of Tahuti, Heru, and Smai Ur, and their titles Iprehui, Shek, and Smai Ur, and corrupted it into Ibrahim, Ishak, and Ismail. And later in English, Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. In Arabic, Ibrahim, Ishak, and Ismail, and so forth. And said that Isaac and Ishmael, Ishak and Ismail were fighting and so forth, who was going to receive the birthright. And it was Ibrahui, quote unquote, Ibrahim, who adjudicated the matter and said that Isaac would be the one, or according to the Muslims, it would be, Ismail and so forth. But it's total fraud. We're talking about Tahuti, a divinity who operates through the moon, the spiritual force that animates the moon on the masculine side. Heru, operating through the sun, the core of the sun, and also the planet Yao, so-called Jupiter. Set, operating through the planet Sobek, or Set, or so-called Mercury, and so forth. These are spiritual forces operate within a certain fashion. They try to corrupt them into actual human beings walking around in Palestine that are the father of all the nations and so forth. Total 100% fraud, idiocy. Abraham never existed. Isaac never existed. Ishmael never existed. They were not black, which is idiotic. They were not white. They didn't exist at all. Those are corruptions in title and function and cosmology of Tahuti, Heru, and Set as Iprahui, Shek, and Smail. We're the first to show the proper etymologies and cosmology of who these deities are and how they were corrupted into fictional cartoon characters who have no existence at all. They were never walking around in Palestine or anywhere else. So, next piece. The next section, we get into the fictional cartoon character Moses. Once again, they took a title of the deity Tahuti. This is the deity Tahuti. He's the deity of divine wisdom, the mouthpiece of Ra and Ra'ed, as well as Amen and Amenet. He is called Ma'ah Sher, which means true. Ma'ah of Sher, of voice and word. Here's the title Ma'al Sher. Sometimes it's written Ma'al Sharu, and sometimes it's written simply Ma'al Sher. Like it is in this instance, there's no you, or the chick that represents the you. It's not in that particular representation. True of voice, the one who speaks or voices or commands divine law. Ma'al Sher was corrupted into Moshe, and Moshe was corrupted in Moshe and Moses and so forth, and Musa in Arabic and so forth. They stole the title from the deity Tahuti. When you look at the book of the Cow of Heaven, talking about the so-called destruction of mankind and so forth, and when Ra decides that he's going to remove himself, go back into the heavenly region, and he decided in that particular text to place Tahuti, the divinity of divine wisdom, who speaks the divine law. He's also the scribe of the deities, the lawgiver. He speaks the divine law, but also scribes it. He gave him an assistant, the dog-headed baboon, who's called Anan, who is his assistant of Tahuti, as you can see here in the stele of Nefer and Pet. There you have Moshe and Anan. That was corrupted into Moshe and Aran, or Moses and Aran, or Aaron. So Aaron is the assistant of the lawgiver and so forth. In the book of the Cow of Heaven, you will find the book of the celestial cow, the book of the Cow of Heaven, and so forth, which is on the tombs of, within the tombs of Tutankhamen and Seti and so forth. You will find Tahuti is asked by Ra to come up to the mountainous region. Ra takes the form of a divine light. He tells Tahuti he wants him to be his representative on earth, his scribe. He tells him to write down what's in the spirit realm. So Tahuti, as Ma'al Sher, goes up to the god in the mountain. The god takes the form of a divine light. This is where you get the burning bush piece. And then he becomes the scribe and lawgiver and representative of the god of light on earth. And then the god of light gives him an assistant, Aran, the dog-headed baboon, and so forth. And then you see the entire cosmology play out. We go through that entire piece in that section. And then when Ra decides to go further up into the heavenly realm, he says that he's going to create a divine field called the Sekhet Hetep, the divine field, Sekhet, of peace and offerings, Hetep, with divine food placed in the divine field, Aru. And so you have Sekhet Aru. That is the quote-unquote promised land for the followers of Tahuti. So that whole notion of Moses being the leader, and he's going to lead people to the promised land after the God who took the form of a divine light or burning bush up on the mountain told him he's going to be the representative and so forth. They stole the entire story from a cosmological story of the divinity who operates through the moon, connecting with the divinity who utilizes the sun to transmit his energy, Ra. And the sun and the moon unite in the form of an eclipse and so forth. And the sun delivers some of its light to the moon and so forth. And now the moon can deliver that light to earth while we're in darkness. So if we follow the moon, if we follow Tahuti, we follow that light in the darkness, the one who can illuminate us because he's wise and has the energy and illumination from the creator of the universe and so forth. If we follow him, he will lead us to the Sekhet Hetep, the divine field of peace and offerings. That's actually the ancestral realm. It's not a place in Palestine. It's not a land of milk and honey and so forth. The milk is the lunar light coming from the moon, and the honey is the solar light, golden solar light coming from the sun. That's the milk and honey coming from heaven. That's where they stole the whole thing from. So there was never a Moses, Moshe, and so forth. Not black, not white. The entire quote-unquote Hebrew story is fraud. When you see this symbol of Tahuti and so forth, holding the two staffs, and they're being swallowed up by these two serpents, Nekabet and Wachet. When they talk about Moses going before the Pharaoh and casting his rod, and then they swallow up the, the other rods and so forth. These are the serpents swallowing up the rod of Moshe. His name Tahuti is also spelled Jehuti. This is where you get Jehuta or Yehuda or Judah and so forth. But let's look at one more. Let's look at one of the short videos from our trip. When we were in the temple of Seti in Abju. Where you will find the Book of the Cow of Heaven, laying out the entire story of Tahuti and Aran and Moshe. The whole cosmology is laid out in the Temple of Seti, as well as the Temple of Tutankhamen and so forth. That image we just saw of Tahuti holding the staff. Things we talked about 21 years ago in the book. We got the primary, source documents and carvings and so forth when we began to go to Kamit. The very first time I went to Kamit, I went by myself. And after that, of course, taking tours and so forth. First time I went by myself to start gathering this information. And that is the image you just saw in the book. Of course, we had seen that image, numerous times, but that's Ma'ashe, holding his rod, holding his staff, and so forth. That's Heru, son of Al-Sar and Al-Set. These various texts that we're talking about, many of them are right here in the Temple of Seti in Abju, so-called Abydos. Okay, so let's switch back from that. And we also show, of course, that Tahuti, by the time you get to the Coptic dialect, and then once Europeans began to invade, Tahuti becomes Tahut. You look here, it's Taut, and Taut became Dawood, and Dawood became Dawood, and Dawood in Hebrew is Dawid and David and so forth. That's where they took that title from. Same thing with Yahuta or Jahuta or Jahut or Jehut. That's where you get Jehuda or Yehuda or Judah and so forth. Different functions and titles of the divinity Tahuti. They simply corrupted to manufacture these fictional cartoon characters. There were no ancient Hebrews at all. There was no ancient Black Hebrews. That's ridiculous. Just like there were no elves on the North Pole. So some fools walking around calling themselves Hebrew Israelites, that's just as stupid as saying I'm a North Pole Elvelite because I'm descendant from the group of elves who were working at Santa's workshop at the North Pole. They never existed. People are foolishly and erroneously trying to tie their blood circle to a fictional group of people who never existed of any race whatsoever. The Bible, Quran, Talmud, 100% fraud, 100% garbage. Now, then we get into the fictional cartoon character Jesus. And we tell the story, the death and resurrection of the divinity. There are two different divinities that are important, however. You have Heru, who's the son of Al-Sar and Al-Set. As you can see here, Al-Sar, Al-Set, and Heru. But then you also have the triad of Amen, Mut, and Khensu. This is a form of Khensu when he is Amen in the form of the deity Khensu with the side lock and so forth. And then you have the other form of Khensu. He looks exactly like Heru, son of Al-Sar and Al-Set, except he has a lunar disc on his head. That's the only difference in the iconography, as you can see here. Heru wears the red and white crown very often, but Khensu Nefer Hetep Heru, he has the lunar disc on his head. But this divinity, Khensu Nefer Hetep Heru, his name Khensu was corrupted into Khensu, Yeshu, Yeshua, Jesus, and later Jesus and so forth. That is a corruption of the deity Khensu, the son of Amen and Mut. You have Amen, Mut, and Khensu, father, mother, and child. You also have Asar, Aset, and Heru. Just like you also have Ptah, Sekhmet, and Nefertim. There are many triads all over Kemet, not just Asar, Aset, and Heru, but Amen, Mut, and Khensu. This is Khensu. He's a healer. He resurrects the spirits from the dead and so forth. He punishes evil and so forth. This is where they get that all the life aspect of the story, the life story portions of the Jesus story. When they talk about the cosmological structure of the Jesus quote unquote myth, that was taken directly from Heru, the son of Asar and Aset, born of the Virgin Merit, which is Aset Merit, was killed, resurrected, the redeemer of the world and all of that. That entire story is a corruption of the divinity Heru, who operates through the core of the sun, as well as the planet Yao, so-called Jupiter. Entire cosmology stolen from the spirits that are operant within nature. They tried to take spirits that are operant within nature, make them living people walking around in Palestine, then making them white, then making themselves the representatives of the fictional little white character and so forth. It started when the Europeans began, the Greeks and Romans and so forth, invaded Kemet. They started making the statues of the deities going from black, as you see here, to white, Isis and Horus and Osiris and, crackers with big beards and hair and everything else. They started making the images of the deities white. Then they tried to, destroy the black images and eventually try to get us to worship them. It took them thousands of years to get to the point where some of our people were foolish enough to embrace that nonsense. But in the book, we go into detail showing who these fictional characters are. And we go throughout the cosmology of Asar, Set, and Heru. Of course, Set becomes Seti or Setin or Satan and so forth. We also talk about the stellar aspect of Set when she's operating through the star system, Sapatit, which the white star screen calls Sirius or Sothis, the brightest star in the sky. Asar operates through the constellation Sa. He's called Asar Sa. The white star screen called that Orion. And then you have Heru operates through, he's called Perarekit. He's the son of Rekit, the son of Aset Sapatit, when he's operating through that same Orion star system, the mother and child in the star system and so forth. The reason why that's important is because Aset, when she's called Sapatit, she's the queen of Sapatit. She's the queen of the star system, Sirius or Sothis, which we call Sapatit. Queen of Sapatit and also the queen of the south. Sapatit was corrupted into Sapa or Saba, and she's the queen of Saba, which is later corrupted into Sheba or Sheba. This is where they get Sheba from. Asar operating through Orion is called Heri-Met, and Heri-Met was corrupted from Heri-Met or Hori-Met. That's a dialectical difference. The chief of the north, Hori-Met, Heri-Met or Hori-Met, the chief Hori of Met of the north. Hori-Met became Sholimet and Solimet and Solomon and so forth. But it started off as Hori-Met, which they would pronounce as Shori-Met or Sholi-Met, and they corrupted into Sholimet, Solimet, Soliman, and Solomon. And then you have Heru, who's Perarekit, the son or offspring, Pera, of the wise queen Rekit. And Perarekit became Benarekit, Benalekim, Benelek or Menelik, the son of Solomon and Sheba and so forth. So we go through the entire cosmology. Asar, Set, and Heru in their stellar shrines operate through the star system Sirius or Sapatit and Orion, and their stellar aspect, them operating or penetrating these stellar constellations, these shrines. This is where they stole the entire story of the queen of the south, meaning the king of the north, Sheba and Solomon. And when she leaves the king of the north, she's pregnant with the son, Heru ben Alekim, which means the son of the wise one, Menelik, and so forth. The names of the divinities were corrupted into these fictional cartoon characters. People trying to identify with the Queen of Sheba, saying that she was a black woman and a leader, did not exist. This is a corruption of Set operating through the star system Sapa, which is corrupted as Saba or Shaba or Sheba. And Sar operating as Horimet, corrupted into Sholimet, Solimet, and all of that. So there was no Solomon, there was no Sheba, there was no Menelik. Menelik II in Ethiopia should have been Menelik II because there was no Menelik I. So, as we said, all these fictional cartoon characters in the Bible did not exist of any race, black, white, or otherwise. Now, then we get into the fictional cartoon character Muhammad. Now, when we go to this image is from the Asetu, which is the so-called Karnak and so forth. On one of the base of the colossal statue of Ramesu II, on the base of his throne on the side, you will see this image of the Nile divinity Hapi. And there's Hapi. In fact, let's pull this up real quick. This is our we have a yearly retreat in South Carolina on Edisto Island called the Hapi Merit Retreat, training, cultural, and ritual retreat. But it's named after the two divinities of the Nile River, but they also govern the river of blood in our bodies and so forth. Hapi is the male divinity, the spirit that animates the Nile River, the masculine force. And then Merit is the female divinity of the Nile River, expansion and contraction. So there's a male deity, Hapi, female divinity, Merit. But they are twin divinities. There's a Merit of the south and a Merit of the north. They are twin female divinities. There's a Hapi of the south who goes into the southern part of the country, and then the aspect of the river that goes in the northern part of the country, the spiritual force that animates the river is Hapi of the north. So these two twin divinities that you see, which you will see when you go with us to Kamit, on the base of the colossal statue of Ramesu II, he's sitting on the throne. You'll see Hap Met, which means hop of the north. Hap Reset means hop of the south, the southern branch of the Nile, the northern branch of the Nile. When Europeans invaded Kamit, they invaded the northern part of Kamit. They didn't get all the way down into Nubia at first and so forth. They were in the northern part of Kamit. When they were looking at the divinity Hapi, they were looking at Hapi of the north, or Hap Met. And we show, of course, the word for water in Kemet is Mu. Munuhap or Muhap is the waters, Mu, of the deity Hap, quote unquote, Nile water. But Mu, Hap, Met are the waters of the northern Hap or the northern Nile. Mu, Hap, Reset, the waters of the southern Nile. Mu, Hap, Met of the waters, Mu of Hap, Met, the northern Nile. That's the spiritual force animating the northern Nile that was corrupted into Muhammed. Muhammed, a deity, a spiritual force that when you stand in the Nile River now, there's an active, expansive force moving through the river. That is Mu, the waters, Hap Met, the spirit animating the northern Met, Hap, that's the divinity. And Mu Hap Reset is the southern Nile. They said Hatmet or Hamed or Ahmed and so forth. They'll try to say that means praiseworthy, but it's really Hatmet. They'll try to say it was a little Arab running around bringing Islam to the people. That little character, Muhammad, never existed. There wasn't a black Muhammad. For Muslims who, brainwashed and thinking that that makes it more pleasing to them because Muhammad's grandfather had 12 black sons. That's ridiculous. Muhammad never existed. This is the origin, this divinity that they never told you about. And we're the first to put this forward. White scholars had no knowledge of this. Black scholars had no knowledge of it. We're the first to give the proper etymology and cosmology of the divinity Hatmet is Muhammed. And if they had invaded southern Kemet first, they wouldn't be calling this little fictional cartoon character Muhammad. Everybody would be Muhapraset. But since they didn't invade southern Kemet, and they weren't dealing with the divinity Hapraset, or trying to corrupt his title Muhapraset, they were corrupting the title of the northern Nile divinity Muhammed. And that's why everybody's using the name Muhammad. So, now, and we're going to just, we're not going to stay too much longer. I don't want to keep you too much longer because, of course, you can listen to the entire, audiobook and read the entire book for free, of course. But we're just going to touch on the fact that this fictional cartoon character Buddha comes from the corruption of the deity Ptah. This is Ptah, part of a tribe, Ptah, Sekhmet, and Nefertim. But of course, you see the fictional character Buddha is a corruption of Ptah. When you look at the cosmology of Ptah and what his function in the world is, and he's the one who fashions the forms of things according to divine order. He makes things real and makes things who they are. You have this, I am who I am, and achieving enlightenment, quote unquote, knowing who you are. Excuse me. That's a corruption of the cosmology of the divinity Ptah. When they talk about, he's born of a virgin, Mahamai, and all of this other nonsense, that's stolen from Asar Set and Heru. We go into detail about that in the book, but the deity Ptah is where they got the fictional cartoon character Buddha from. There was no little sage running around 2,500 years ago in India. They took the very same divinity, and the only reason you see black images of a Buddha, in India and Cambodia and so forth, because the original people of those areas were black, and they still are black today. They were practicing traditional religion, but then when their traditional religion was corrupted and they started embracing these fake traditions and so forth, they did the same thing that some of our people over here did. They started trying to blacken up these fictional cartoon characters. You see some black people try to blacken up Jesus or blacken up Moses. They try to say Jesus was a black revolutionary or Moses was a revolutionary. They try to say Abraham. Anything that the white and offspring give us, we try to blacken them. You see fools blackening up Santa Claus. They'll be proud to put a black Santa Claus in their house. They know it's fictional, but they want to, if they're going to have a fictional character, they want a black fictional character. We did the same thing with Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and so forth. We try to blacken up fictional cartoon characters as opposed to looking at where did this fictional character come from? That these racist white Asians and racist Europeans trying to force pseudo-spirituality on us. And in the East with Hinduism and Buddhism trying to make us believe that we incarnated to be on a lower level of society in the caste system, and that's just our fate and so forth, and we shouldn't fight it. That idiocy, instead of embracing our enemies who try to keep us down with these fake religions, why don't we investigate the origins of that nonsense? When you investigate it, you will find that Buddha is a fictional cartoon character. They stole it from the deity Ptah. When you know the cosmology of Ptah, not just the name, but the cosmology of the divinity, you see exactly how they stole it, and we talk about that in the book. This is Ptah Nefer, hair, the beautiful face or radiant, illuminate face and so forth. That's in the Valley of the Kings. When we go in the Valley of the Kings, you'll see that. But you see the deity Ptah, solar disk on his head. Eventually, this is where you see Buddha with a radiant halo over his head and so forth, the one of the beautiful face, the enlightened one and so forth. We talk about the term Sesh or Sesha, meaning wise one in Kemet. Then you have the term sage, meaning wise one and so forth. All of that stolen from the cosmology of the divinity Ptah as well as Asar. And then we show Amen and Amenet, the great god and great goddess. That's in the temple of Aperasetiu and so forth. This is Amen, Mut, and Khensu. We talked about that triad before. Khensu, the child of the great god Amen and the great mother Mut, was corrupted into Khensu and Jesus and Yeshua and all of that. We already talked about that. But once again, this is Amen and Amenet seated together. But this is the great temple, Per Amen, Peramen, and this is the sanctuary of the Supreme Being on the masculine side. And there also you'll find Amenet in the temple as well. But Peramen was corrupted into Beramen or Baramen. Baramen, the ultimate one, the great being in Hinduism and so forth. That's the corruption of Peramen. And then we talk about the Bible and, in fact, let's go back up real quick. It's important to note when we're talking about Tahuti, you see the lunar disc on his head. The term for the lunar disc in ancient Kemet is Yah and Yau. That's the origin of the Yah or Yau, which became Yahweh or Yahweh and so forth. That's the divinity of the moon. We did a whole course, a 4-week course, showing that the Hebrews never existed and the origin of Yahweh and all of that. But that's the title, once again, of Tahuti. And then even when you look at the name of the bird itself, the Habwi bird, Habwi. Tahuti is the Habwi. He's the great Habwi bird and so forth. But that Habwi became Yahweh, and Yahweh as well is the corruption of titles of the divinity Tahuti. So that's one aspect of it. But we also show here when you look at the deity Ra, one of the titles in Kemet, Ur is a title, which means great or great one. Urat is the feminine title, the great one. So you have Amen Ur, meaning Amen the great. Heru Ur, Heru the great one. Urt Heka, which is feminine. The great Urt, one of divine words, Heka. You have Ra Ur, the great divinity. Ura, Ur, once again, is Ura. That's the great divinity. Now, there was no letter L in Kemet, so if you have foreign loan words, you will get that, corruption. But when we took our language and culture up into the Near East and so forth, Ra, Ur, or Ur, Ra became Ura, Ura, and they would take our rolling R, and that rolling R became an L, so Ura became Ura, Ura, Ula, Ulla, that Ulla, and later Allah, but that Ulla comes from Ura in ancient Kemet. Even today, in the Akan language, there are no letter L's. There are rolling R's. So if there's a foreign word that enters the language, like the word mulatto, Akan person would say mura. Muratoni. We would say mulatto because there are no L's in our Khan language. It was Muratoni, the rolling R interchanges with the L. Same thing in ancient Kemet, there was no letter L. So when the Greeks invaded, for example, and the Ptolemies became the rulers, Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, Ptolemy, Lemy, Ptolemy the third, and so forth. When they spelled it in the language of Kemet, they had to put Ptoremi, the symbol for the R, Ptoremi, instead of Ptolemy, because we didn't have a letter L. It's a rolling R. And linguistically, rolling R's and L's interchange across the board. So Ra, Ur became Ura, Ura, Ula, La, La, and so forth. That is a corruption of a title of the deity Ra. And Urat, a title of Ra'et, became Ulat and Alat. And then they reduced Alat, the goddess, to be a daughter of Allah, and then later just got rid of the female goddesses altogether. But in pre-Islamic Arabia, they were worshiping Ra and Ra'et, Ra, Ra'et, Ura, Ura'et, and so forth. So later on it becomes Allah and Alat. But those are corruptions of titles, Ura, Ura'et, or Urat, and so forth. And when they corrupt the titles of the actual deities, and then stick those corrupted titles in their little book, the Quran, and then start attaching ideas and words and commandments to these corrupt titles, and then claim that these corrupt titles that were attached to a fictional, invisible divinity, trying to pretend like that's a real divinity, those words are really the words of the whites and their offspring, masquerading as the words of a divinity. They had to give their little fake deity a name, so they simply corrupted the name of the real divinity, Ura, Urat, and so forth. And then they corrupted that into Ura, Ula, Ula, and all of that. And then put their ideas into this fictional cartoon character deity. So Yahweh is fictional, Allah is fictional, Buddha, Brahmin, all these characters are fictional. Now, when we study the real deities and invoke the real deities, Amen, Amenet, Ra, Ra'et, Ka and Ka'et, Hehu and Hehut, Nun and Arnet, Atem, Atemet, Shu and Tefnu, Gebanud, Asar, Aset, Set, Nebethet, Sekmet, Herubedeti, all these different divinities that exist in various Afurakani languages and cultures and so forth, we have the real information. And of course, we show at the end which many people have seen, different representations of this when they corrupted the deity Aset, who's called Merit. Merit means beloved in the language of Kemet. Merit, she's the beloved Merit of Alsar and so forth. Merit is corrupted into Mary. So of course, that's the version of Aset and Heru, Mary and the baby fictional character Jesus and so forth. But everything that they put forward, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, Hinduism, Buddhism, as well as Taoism, and on, all nonsense, foolishness, fraud, garbage, pseudo, fake, pseudo religion. No value whatsoever. We also go into, how Heri Seshta was corrupted into Heri Seshtos and Keristos and Christ and all this other stuff. There's no such thing as Christ consciousness. That is nonsense. We have to stop listening to what our enemies are saying and look at the real etymologies, the real linguistics, the real cosmology. Who is Heru? Who is Het Heru? Who is Herit? Who's the female falcon divinity? Who's the male falcon divinity? Where did the term karast come from? The term karast that has to do with the mummy is also the term for crust or crystallize. That's the origin of the term, to harden, to encrust, to crystallize, and so forth. That has nothing to do with Christ. There's no such thing as Christ consciousness. Our people are always looking for a way to hold on to the fraud. So that's not what it is. All right. So, of course, if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat room. That is the information we wanted to share with everybody. The impact and the, significance of the KUKUU-TUNTUM The Ancestral Jurisdiction, as we said earlier. For the past 21 years, over 1 million downloads. People have been downloading the book. It's a free ebook, of course, and the MP3 files and so forth. Over 1 million downloads. People have been raising their children truthfully. They're raising their children, learning about Ra and Ra'ed and Amen and Amenet and Ma'a and Ma'at, and naming their children properly and so forth based on the divinities that govern them. Learning that these fictional cartoon characters of these fake religions never existed and do not exist of any form, any race or color at all. So they're not trapped and enslaved by these foolish ideas, and they don't structure their lives based on these foolish ideas. For example, when you have real information, you know that Ra is the creator, Ra'ed is the creatress. Amen is the great father, Amenet is the great mother. So then that informs the manner in which you structure your properly established relationships. So the Afurakani man and Afuraitkaitnit women, as reflections of Amen and Amenet and Ra and Ra'ed, operate in complementary balance. This idiocy of the woman was made to be a helpmeet or a helpmate for the man is pure stupidity. That's slavery. Then you have fools running around talking about submission and what it means to submit, and once a woman is in her feminine, she's looking forward to submission. Pure stupidity. People are still operating based on the enslaved mindset of white patriarchal nonsense and misogyny, and trying to blacken that stupidity up, as opposed to recognizing the goddess balances out the god, the male balances out the female. There's always been complementary balance in Afuraitkaitnit culture. So when you understand that, your marriage relationship and so forth will reflect real balance and not this idiocy, and perpetuate this imbalance within your own relationship. And then the way your children see you relate to one another, it doesn't happen that way. Now, so that's just an example. But there are numerous examples of that. Okay, so it's a question, how does the Kabbalah relate to Kemetic cosmology? So what you'll find is people will say, for example, Sufism is esoteric Islam, which of course is not. They'll say Gnosticism is esoteric Christianity, which is not. And they'll say Kabbalah is esoteric Judaism, which is not. Kabbalah is corruption and misinformation as well. And they talk about the tree of life, that is a corruption, the Pa'ut Nsoru, the Postjatu Nsoru. There are different companies of divinities, collections of divinities, like the 4 sons of Heru, or the 8 divinities of Kemenu and so forth, or the 9 divinities of the of Anu, which they will call the Ennead, and where they got the general structure for the Kabbalah from and so forth. But those Sephiroth on the tree of life and the little angels and their attributes, those are just fragmented corruptions of functions of deities from Kamit. But they're not, they're fragments and they're fragmented corruptions. So it's not going to give you reality. Who's the divinity that governs your head, that you incarnated into the womb with through a specific blood circle? We as Afuraitkaitnit people, we incarnate through a specific blood circle. We have matriclan divinity that governs our matriclan ancestresses and ancestors, that animates the ovum cell that goes into our being. There's a patriclan divinity that animates the sperm cell that carries that genetic material that governs our patriclan ancestresses and ancestors. So you have a matriclan divinity, a patriclan divinity that animates the sperm and ovum cell that unite to, bring your body together. But then you also have a divinity that governs the head. And that trifecta of the deity that governs the head and the matriclan and patriclan divinities and those specific attributes that make you a unique individual, the Kabbalah will never give you that, because they don't have anything, it has nothing to do with reality. They can't tell you what your matriclan divinity is. A Khan person practicing traditional religion, or a Khan person in North America practicing the hoodoo tradition, which is Akan, you can find out what deity incarnated with you into the world. The Kabbalah can't tell you that. But if somebody's practicing the Akan tradition, Yoruba tradition, Igbo tradition, whether it's on the continent or the way we preserve those traditions here in North America, as hoodoo and juju and Gullah tradition and so forth, we know who the divinities who actually make up our spiritual anatomy are. You'll never learn that from the Kabbalah. You'll never learn it from Sufism. You'll never learn it from Gnosticism. No European pseudo-esotericism will teach you that. Okay. And we touch on some of that in the KUKUU-TUNTUM as well. But then when you look at our let's just switch over to that real quick. This book right here, the Okra Complex, one of our books on our website, The Nature of the Soul, the Divine Consciousness that Governs the Head, and so forth. But we go into detail cosmologically about the nature of the soul. And let me just the nature of the soul, your divine function in the world, incarnation, reincarnation, how you came into the world, what divinities govern you, what kind of energy complex you have that you receive from your matriclan, patriclan, and how that interfaces with the divinity that governs the head, and so forth. And we explained it in the context of Akan cosmology, as well as the, short in ancient Kamit. But when you see that, you'll see it's the same structure wherever our people exist in the world. So just as we said earlier, the Okra is the soul, divine consciousness, the deity in the head region. And Akan, Okra for males, Okra for females. It's Kai in ancient Kamit. It is the Oriri Inu, the inner Oriri, the inner spiritual head in Yoruba. It's the Selido in Vodun. It's the Chi in Igbo and so forth. Everybody has a name for that. But when you talk about the fourfold structure of the soul, the divine consciousness, the deity that governs your head, a male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female, that you come into the world, you incarnate into the world with, you have a better understanding of that full cosmology. Okay, so let me switch back out of that real quick. Okay, so when you go to our page, the Adikat Cosmology of Creation page, you'll see like 15 different videos of our recent trips to Kamit. We have a trip coming up in September 26th to October 4th, going to 12 different cities and so forth. And then we also have a trip coming up, the regular trip. So that's for the fall for the people who missed the spring trip. And then we have, when you scroll further down, you'll see next year's trip is in June 4th to June 12th. But whether you look at the one for June 4th to June 12th or the one from September 26th through October 4th, we sent out an email. If you're on the list, you should have gotten this email. We sent an email about this. We have a couple of spaces for each trip, and each trip is 50% off. So we have a couple of 50% off spaces. We did that previously. We want to do it again. So instead of paying $3,000, it's $1,500 for the, for the 50% off. There are a couple of spaces. The email we sent out Friday, we said this is the final weekend for that. We said that mainly because more than likely those last couple of spaces will be taken, but you can still check and see if you would like to go on a trip with us either in September or in next June. Not this June, but next June. So this September coming up 5 months from now, or if you would like to go next June, we have a couple of 50% off spots there. But you can also just do the regular payment plans and so forth, put the deposit down and do the regular payment plans. So, and you will see all the details there. Now, hold on one second. Let me make sure we okay, so there's a question, what does it mean when Tahuti or Ifa governs your head? So it depends on what they're telling you is going on. Very often, and you have to see, it's case by case basis to see what's going on. But sometimes what they're talking about is that you're somebody who needs to be, initiated to Ifa, and you have to really look into what's going on. Now, we're talking about, when we talk about Ifa and so forth, you're talking about the Yoruba tradition. Black people maintain the Yoruba tradition in North America just like they maintained it in Brazil as candomblé, and in Cuba as the Lukumi tradition. In North America, those people who were Yoruba, who were forced into enslavement, they maintain the Yoruba tradition here as well. And it's called juju. And juju is a Yoruba word meaning to cast or throw. So the juju man or juju woman in North America originally was the Yoruba man and Yoruba woman. So we never stopped practicing. Those of our people who were Yoruba never stopped practicing. So you're not dependent on Nigerians. You're not dependent on people in Brazil. You're not dependent on people in Cuba. You're not dependent on anybody anywhere outside of your own ancestral blood circle for the juju tradition if you were born in North America. And it's the same with the Akan tradition. We maintain that. Those of us who are Akan maintain it as the hoodoo tradition in North America. So we're not dependent on going to Ghana to get initiated or going to Jamaica or going somewhere else. We maintained our traditions here just like everybody else did. So but in general, if they're talking about Ifa, they're talking about the, male priests are, Ifa priests are Babalaos and so forth. There are female priestesses who have Ifa, who are Iyanifas and so forth. And there are differences because, the way Yoruba people practice Ifa is different than the way, for example, Igbo people practice. They call it Afa, and the women in the Igbo tradition, they have every, access to these shrines as the men do. In Yoruba, they'll say that women can't, have Odu, they can't have the shrine Odu and so forth. There are restrictions placed on women. You have to look into these traditions and see how things were corrupted over the past 1,000 years when Islam was influencing people in West Africa, Afuraitkaitnit, and later Christianity, as well as Judaism and sometimes Hinduism and so forth. The things that they give to us now, a lot of it is filtered through corruption that has been manifest over the past 1,000 years. So we don't just assume that because they're saying something and they're from the continent, it must be accurate. They started getting invaded by, Muslims over 1,000 years ago. The Akan people were living where Mali is right now, the regions of Mali, Burkina Faso, and so forth. The reason we moved away from there over 1,000 years ago to move towards the forest belt where Ghana and Ivory Coast is now is because of Muslim invasions, the Almoravids and all of that. So the ancient empire of Ghana fell and we moved south. Some of our people stayed up there. A number of us moved south because we weren't going to participate in that fraudulent religion and culture. So, but that just shows that even 1,000 years ago, corruption had already seeped in. So some people bringing some of that corruption with them. And later on, over the centuries, some of it gets woven into the traditions. We have to examine what people are talking about. We don't just accept something because somebody said they're from the continent, number one. Number two, and most importantly, we maintained our traditions. So when we were enslaved and forced over here in the so-called 1700s and 1800s and so forth, the way we were practicing ancestral religion then is what we brought over here. And then later on, you have Christianity coming and more corruption coming from Islam and other corruptions coming. That's what happened after we were already gone. So many of us had a pure tradition where we were dropped off over here, and that's the tradition we passed down generation after generation. And that is hoodoo, which is Akan, and juju, which is Yoruba, and Wanga, which is Ovambo, and then Gengan, which is Fang, and voodoo, which is Eve and so forth. And in fact, we did our documentary is about that very subject. This is our documentary film, which we won an award for. And you see, we talk about voodoo, juju, and gengai, wanga, and hoodoo. Amarukafo Adibisa, African American Ancestral Divination. It's myself and Voodoo Queen Kalinda LeBeau out of New Orleans, and Seshat Tutnankwajet out of Florida, and Kajara Niya Nebethet, who's in Georgia, and Mama Mawusia Shakir, who's in Ohio. And we're talking about the various forms of divination that we preserved in our blood circles for hundreds of years here in North America. We preserved the different traditions. So, okay, so traditions prior to the invasions of, you said prior to Genghis Khan and the colonialists in North America. So you have, of course, thousands of years ago, Afurakani people were forced. Thousands of years ago, we came over here before we were forced over here. Of course, the pyramids in Mexico and so forth, those were the same kind of pyramids we were building in ancient Kamit and Kemet. Of course, so 3,000 years ago, we were doing that. The Asians came over here afterwards. So they're coming from Siberia and so forth. And archaeology as well as genetics bear that out. They come later. They come in contact with us. They wage war against us and so forth. Europeans come later. So now you have Europeans and Asians and our people over here. But one thing that the Europeans brought, as well as the Asians, is they brought their diseases. They brought diseases that, when you look at the population history of the ancient Western Hemisphere, ancient America, and so forth, when they brought these diseases, the hantavirus and other things, just like in Europe, when the bubonic plague hit, the so-called Black Death, and it wiped out 50 to 75% of the entire population within 5 years, millions and millions of people wiped out by the Black Death. That didn't just happen in Europe. That also happened over here with the Asians with their diseases, as well as the Europeans coming over here, wiped out 95% of the population of the ancient, North America, Central America, South America. And so that's those of our people who had come over here. And we weren't coming over here like just constantly for thousands of years. It was a smaller population of our people over here. But that wiped out our people who were here, plus the majority of the Asians who were here. So then the Europeans came up with the idea, and we know the whole story about, Bartholomew, Las and all these other people deciding that, okay, well, we need to start bringing, Black people from the Western and central part of the continent of Afuraitkaitnit over here, to work these plantations and all this other stuff. So that's when we started being brought over here. But those, the viral agents and, the epidemics, the pandemics that hit ancient America, that happened, a while before, by the time the Europeans in the 1500s and 1600s started coming over here, the vast majority of our population had already been wiped out by these, Asian viruses we didn't have defense for. But then Europeans came with their filthy diseases, wiped out the majority of our population plus a large percentage of the Asian population, which is, the Asians are just as much enemies as the Europeans, so that it doesn't matter. But then they started bringing our people over here. So it wasn't this notion that there was a teeming population of Black people and this foolishness that Black people put forward now, that most of us are descendant from the ancient people who built the pyramids over here, and we didn't come over here on slave ships. Once again, that's just self-hatred, people trying to separate themselves from the continent, pretending like they're Native Americans when they're really not. Never been the truth. And if people look at genetics as well as the culture and so forth, they'll find the reality. But people are always looking for an excuse to try to pretend like they didn't come from Africa and they really were in ancient America this whole time, which they weren't. Okay. And we'll be addressing that in some more upcoming work as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going way over time, but so yeah, so we have. Let me make sure I didn't miss any of the other questions in the chat. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and end here. I really wanted to stop at 11, no further than 11, but we went a little bit over. But this, of course, is going to be accessible on the site, on the YouTube page from this point forward. But once again, for those who reached out and for the new people, we do have a couple of the discounted spaces. So if you want to travel to Kamit with us, either in September or next June, you can secure the space now before those discounted 50% discounted spaces are gone. And you can also join our email list. You can email us, via the channel kwesiakon@gmail.com. We're Ojidafo on Instagram, Kwesiakon on Facebook, as well as Ojidafo on Facebook, Ojidafo on Twitter. But of course, you can go to our site, ojidafo.com as well. If you have any questions, or you can send us an email, and this is what's going on. One final thing, we started a podcast, and we're about to start dropping some weekly episodes. Is the Hoodoo Cast, talking about the Hoodoo tradition, which is our kind of ancestral religion in North America, but talking about ancestral religion born of our blood circles. We are on the first episode we did. You see myself and Voodoo Queen Kalinda Laveau. It was part of our Echisan Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference that we have every March. And we did it in a special way. We kind of made that conference the first podcast episode. But I went to New Orleans to film, and we did it live. But from this point going forward, I'll be going to different cities for people who practice the Hoodoo tradition. Be interviewing people in different cities, so it'll be a traveling podcast. It won't be, most of them will not be live, but we'll be dropping these episodes every, on a weekly basis. So we sent out when you go to our page, scroll up a little bit, you'll see the Hoodoo Cast page. That's the first episode. You can join our Patreon community. You'll have access to not only the podcast, but you also have access to content that will be just for Patreon, as well as we have 38 online courses, and we're going to be uploading those courses so people can check those. Check those out. Let me just show that real quick. So we're on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. You can listen to the first episode. It should be it's either up on Apple Music now, or it will be up, or Apple Podcasts, or it will be up very soon. Let me see one more thing. So this is we've taught 38 online courses. These are the little flyers. That's a collage of the 38 flyers of our online courses. They're archived, and most of them are either $10 or $15 for the 6-week course or the 4-week course that you can access. But for those who join the Patreon community, we will be uploading these courses. So for the $7.77 a month for the Patreon community, for the Hoodoo Cast community, you'll be having access to these courses as well. So that's one of the benefits of joining the Patreon community on the Hoodoo Cast page. So That's what's coming up. And we also have a fundraiser. We're going to be going to this is the 21st anniversary of KUKUU-TUNTUM. So we're going to be going to 21 cities in 21 weeks for the podcast. Once again, it's a traveling podcast. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So you'll see that. We just put that out the other day just to assist in what we're doing. And in fact, we can put the link for that. We'll put the link for that in the chat room right quick. And what we're doing is, what we do is we, travel through a different city. Just like we did with New Orleans. We have to pay for travel, of course, pay for a studio space or venue space to rent out to do the episode and set up the lighting and the cameras and everything else. And, we're doing that in every city. So we're, raising some funds to cover those expenses. So, if you've been benefited from the books that, the 31 free book downloads or anything that we put forward, if you'd like to contribute to our effort, we're going to do 21 cities in 21 weeks, and we'll be dropping these episodes, weekly and getting this information out in a greater fashion. Plus more content, not just the podcast audio and the podcast video. We'll have the audio as well as the visuals, but we'll have additional information. We have more books coming out. We're going to be releasing more publications this year. So it's a lot going on. Okay, so it's 11:30. So we're going to go ahead and end it here. Once again, if you have any questions, just let us know. And again, Yedase, we thank you for tuning in. And Yabeshiabia, we will meet again.